The studio lights blaze as Karoline Leavitt walked confidently onto the political talk show stage, her navy blue blazer sharp and professional, her blonde hair styled to perfection for the cameras. At just 26, the youngest White House press secretary in American history had faced tough crowds before, but nothing could prepare her for what was about to unfold. An audience of 200 buzzed with anticipation, phones already recording, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Across from her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a 43-year-old former civil rights attorney turned politician. Calm but razor-focused, Crockett wore a simple black suit, her posture relaxed yet alert, like a trial lawyer preparing to cross-examine a hostile witness. The contrast was striking. Leavitt, young, media-savvy, and backed by an entourage, represented the flashy rise of Gen Z conservatism, while Crockett, arriving quietly with only a folder in hand, embodied experience, grit, and substance. Moments earlier, Leavitt had delivered a sharp critique of progressive policies, drawing cheers from her conservative supporters in the audience. But the confident performance that had cemented her reputation as a conservative rising star was about to spiral into a viral nightmare. Crockett leaned forward with a faint, knowing smile, the look of a lawyer who had been waiting for exactly this moment. What happened in the next 30 seconds didn't just silence Leavitt. It left the studio gasping and social media exploding with clips destined to rack up millions of views within hours. This wasn't simply a political disagreement. It was about to become the most savage takedown of the year, a masterclass in how a single, perfectly timed response could unravel a carefully crafted public image. To understand the magnitude of the clash, one had to know who these women were and why this mattered. Karoline Leavitt had built a meteoric career, from college Republican clubs in New Hampshire to becoming the youngest White House press secretary in history. Polished, sharp-tongued, and commanding millions of followers across social media, she was hailed as a conservative queen of Gen Z. Her charisma and snappy one-liners made her a conservative darling and a role model to many young Republicans. But her rapid rise, bolstered by family connections and insulated from scrutiny, left her vulnerable to an opponent who came prepared. That opponent, Jasmine Crockett, had carved her name as a civil rights attorney who spent 15 years fighting cases others wouldn't touch. Police brutality, voting rights, workplace discrimination. She grew up working class in St. Louis, paid her way through law school with multiple jobs, and entered politics not for ambition, but to fix injustices from the inside. Known for her sharp intellect and surgical precision in debate, Crockett never entered a confrontation without ammunition. Unlike Leavitt, she didn't rely on theatrics or viral moments. She thrived on facts, patience, and devastating timing. The live debate started with standard talking points, but Leavitt's trademark arrogance quickly emerged. She accused Crockett of hypocrisy, painting her as a progressive who lived in wealth while claiming to represent working families. The jab drew appreciative murmurs from conservatives in the crowd, but Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she struck back with a question that hit like a thunderclap. "What's your family's net worth again?" In seconds, the balance shifted. She reminded the audience of federal contracts won by Leavitt's father's construction company during her White House tenure. Information Leavitt clearly hadn't expected to surface. The young press secretary tried to regain control with personal jabs, mocking Crockett's legal career as elitist, but Crockett calmly dismantled the attack. She explained that her 15 years as a lawyer weren't spent amassing wealth, but working mostly pro bono on civil rights cases, fighting for justice where others wouldn't. The exchange escalated, with Leavitt rattling off talking points about Crockett's voting record, but Crockett was ready, pointing out that the very infrastructure bill Leavitt condemned had directly benefited her father's firm. Tension in the studio grew unbearable. Leavitt's composure cracked as her voice rose, accusing Crockett of distraction, but Crockett's smooth reply, offering to read from the contract documents themselves, sent shockwaves through the room. Leavitt doubled down, accusing Crockett of never having held a real job, an attack that drew cheers from her supporters but crossed the line into personal insult. What followed would become one of the most replayed moments in political television. Crockett leaned forward, her voice calm yet edged with steel, and began recounting her own life. At 16, she had worked the night shift at a fast food restaurant to help her mother pay rent after her father left. In college, she scrubbed toilets and vacuumed floors on overnight cleaning shifts to pay for textbooks. In law school, She juggled 3 jobs, tutoring, waiting tables, and data entry, while graduating with $180,000 in debt. Because unlike you, she said, her voice carrying the weight of lived experience, I didn't have a family construction business to fall back on. The studio was silent. Phones captured every word. Karoline Leavitt, the Gen Z conservative star who had built her brand on humiliating opponents with snappy comebacks, sat visibly shaken, her carefully polished armor pierced by the raw truth of Crockett's story. In that moment, the balance of power flipped. What began as a routine political talk show had become a cautionary tale of overconfidence meeting preparation, a viral political takedown destined to echo in campaign strategy sessions and political science classrooms for years to come. The audience was hanging on every word now, and Karoline Leavitt looked like she wanted to sink into her chair. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's voice, steady but growing sharper with every sentence, cut through the studio like a blade. You want to talk about those 15 years as a so-called high-priced lawyer? She asked. Let me tell you what they really were. My very first case was representing a janitor who was fired for trying to organize his co-workers. I worked that case for 2 years and made exactly $0 because he couldn't afford to pay me. She paused deliberately, letting the weight of her words settle before continuing. My second case was a single mother who had been sexually harassed by her supervisor. The company had teams of lawyers from 3 firms. She only had me, working out of a borrowed office, eating ramen noodles for dinner, so I could afford to take her case to trial. When Leavitt tried to interject, Crockett lifted her hand with quiet authority. I'm not finished. She pressed on, her voice never rising, but each story striking harder than the last. I represented a factory worker who lost his arm in an accident because his company ignored safety regulations. I fought 3 years to get him compensation while he lost his house and nearly lost his family. I represented families whose children died because a chemical company poisoned their water. I represented elderly people kicked out of nursing homes because they couldn't pay. I represented veterans denied benefits they earned with their blood. The audience was visibly shaken. Some were in tears, while even Leavitt supporters looked uneasy. Crockett's words carried an undeniable weight, and when she finally leaned back slightly, her message landed with precision. So when you sit there in your designer suit and tell me I don't know what real jobs or real struggle look like, you're not just wrong. You're insulting every person I've ever fought for. The audience exploded into thunderous applause. But Crockett wasn't finished. She reached calmly for the folder she had kept at her side. Now let's talk about you, Karoline. Your real job experience. She opened the file, her tone casual, almost conversational, but deadly. You graduated college and immediately got a job on a political campaign. Not because of your qualifications, but because your family donated $50,000 to that candidate. Leavitt's eyes widened in shock. This wasn't supposed to be public knowledge. Crockett continued, relentless. From there was campaign after campaign. Always politics. Always fueled by family connections. Tell me, Karoline, when did you ever punch a time clock? When did you ever wonder if you'd make rent? Leavitt stammered. That's not fair. Political work is real work. Crockett arched an eyebrow. Is it? Because according to your financial disclosures, you've been receiving a $3,000 monthly allowance from your family trust fund since you were 18, even while you were working in the White House. Gasps rippled across the studio. Leavitt flushed red, whispering, How do you have that information? Crockett replied coolly, It's public record. Anyone who knows where to look can find it. Then she pulled out another document. You've criticized me for living in a nice home and sending my children to private school. But let's talk about your living situation. You live in a $2.8 million Georgetown townhouse. Not on your government salary. Of course. According to the deed, it was purchased by the Leavitt Family Trust just 3 months before you started the White House. The crowd gasped audibly as Crockett drove the knife deeper. And while you rail against elites, you spent your career attending $1,000 plate fundraising dinners at exclusive country clubs. Shall I remind everyone of your speech last month at the Metropolitan Club? She held up a photo, Leavitt in an elegant gown, champagne flute in hand, smiling amid wealthy donors in tuxedos and ball gowns. You claim to understand working-class struggles while sipping champagne and eating caviar. The average worker would need 2 weeks' pay just to get in the door of that room. Leavitt looked visibly ill. Her confidence was gone, replaced with panic and shame. Crockett pressed forward for the final blow. And about that infrastructure bill you attacked me over. Do you want to know why I voted against it? Because it contained a provision eliminating environmental protections for construction projects. Projects like the ones your family's company profits from. So let's be clear. You accuse me of betraying American workers, when in reality, you supported a bill that would have made your family millions while poisoning the very communities those workers live in. That's not just hypocrisy, Karoline. She paused, her gaze locking on Leavitt. In some circles, we call that corruption. The word landed like a thunderclap. The audience gasped, some leaping to their feet in applause. Even Leavitt's own supporters clapped, unable to deny the sheer force of Crockett's takedown. The studio erupted into a standing ovation, phones recording as history unfolded live on air. Karoline Leavitt, once the sharp-tongued rising star of conservative media, sat frozen in silence, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. The moderator tried to salvage the moment. Miss Leavitt, would you like to respond to any of the Congresswoman's points? Leavitt opened her mouth, closed it, tried again, and finally stammered, I think there's been some misunderstanding about my background. Crockett leaned back, her voice calm but edged with steel. What misunderstanding would that be, Karoline? The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the furious clicking of cameras. In less than half an hour, Karoline Leavitt's carefully crafted image had crumbled, and Jasmine Crockett had delivered a political takedown that would be replayed, studied, and remembered for years to come. Her tone softened, almost like a teacher guiding a struggling student, as Crockett asked, which part was incorrect? Leavitt, visibly shaken, stammered that it wasn't as simple as Crockett was making it sound, insisting that her family had worked hard for everything they had. Crockett calmly acknowledged that might be true, but quickly redirected the point. This wasn't about Leavitt's family. It was about Leavitt herself, claiming to understand working-class struggles while living off a trust fund and attacking people who had genuinely fought their way out of poverty. The exchange lasted only a few more minutes, but the damage was done. Every attempt Leavitt made to defend herself only deepened the wound, as Crockett methodically corrected her misstatements and revealed contradictions in her story. By the time the debate ended, it was clear to everyone watching that Leavitt had been utterly defeated. Within minutes, clips of Crockett's takedown spread like wildfire across social media. The hashtag Crockett Destroys Leavitt began trending instantly, followed closely by hashtag Privileged Politician and hashtag Real Jobs. A 2-minute compilation of Crockett dismantling Leavitt's credibility racked up more than 3 million views in the first hour. The moment Crockett exposed Leavitt's trust fund payments while she criticized others for being out of touch became an instant meme. Commentators across the political spectrum praised Crockett's composure and preparation. Even conservative analysts admitted Leavitt had been unprepared for such sharp opposition. One prominent political blogger declared, "In 20 years of covering politics, I've never seen a politician's credibility implode so completely in real time." Crockett hadn't just won the debate. She had ended Leavitt's standing as a credible voice for working-class values. Meme creators took over from there. Screenshots of Leavitt's stunned expression appear with captions like, "When you realize your trust fund is public record, and that face you make when you attack someone's background without Googling theirs first." A photo of Leavitt at a country club event, champagne glass in hand, was compared side by side with images of factory workers and truck drivers. One viral meme placed her photo next to a lunch pail with the caption, "Spot the difference." The political fallout was swift. Within 24 hours, 3 major networks canceled her scheduled appearances under the guise of scheduling conflicts, while conservative groups that once championed her began pulling back. A prominent foundation quietly removed her from its speaker's bureau, and a book deal in negotiation was abruptly shelved. More devastating than the media backlash was a reaction from ordinary working-class voters who had once believed in her. A truck driver from Ohio posted angrily that he had defended Leavitt for months, only to discover she had been living off mommy and daddy's money while pretending to understand his struggles. A factory worker from Michigan compared her to Crockett directly. noting that Crockett had worked 3 jobs in college, while Leavitt had been collecting $3,000 a month from her trust fund. To them, the contrast couldn't have been clearer about who truly represented working people. Major news outlets ran fact checks that verified Crockett's every claim, further cementing Leavitt's humiliation. Analysts framed the confrontation as a textbook case of political authenticity, or lack thereof. One leading newspaper called it a vivid example of everything wrong with modern political discourse, noting how politicians fabricate personas that crumble under scrutiny. A Harvard professor published a detailed breakdown of Crockett's strategy, highlighting her preparation, timing, emotional intelligence, and surgical delivery of information. Television shows dedicated entire segments to analyzing what many now call a masterclass in debate preparation, one that would be studied by political strategists for years to come. Insiders marveled at Crockett's precision. She had not only researched Leavitt's public positions, but also her private financial history, using nothing more than public records. A former campaign manager described it as surgical, noting how Crockett patiently waited for the perfect moment to strike, after Leavitt attacked her first. The revelation that no leaks or inside sources had been involved only made Crockett's preparation look even more impressive, while Leavitt's team appeared careless for not vetting their own candidate thoroughly. Meanwhile, the business world moved swiftly to sever ties. A major tech company canceled a planned keynote, a consulting firm rescinded a lucrative offer, and several corporate boards withdrew consideration for her as a director. The collapse of her brand underscored how quickly corporations abandon political figures when authenticity comes into question. Political consultants began warning clients about the dangers of the Leavitt effect, the implosion that happens when carefully crafted personas clash with inconvenient facts. For Crockett, the night was transformative. Speaking invitations poured in nationwide, and talk began about her potential for higher office. Debate coaches and political trainers across the country began using her takedown as required viewing, teaching students the importance of research, authenticity, and timing. The moment wasn't just a debate. It became a cultural milestone, a vivid dividing line between politicians who had struggled their way up and those who coasted on family-privileged. Leavitt's attempts at damage control only worsened things. Her statement acknowledging her family support was widely mocked as tone-deaf, and a follow-up interview, where she stumbled trying to justify her wealth, cemented her hypocrisy. 6 months later, the exchange was still referenced in political circles as a cautionary tale about arrogance, authenticity, and underestimating opponents. Crockett's victory was hailed as a product of rigorous preparation and flawless execution, while Leavitt's downfall reminded everyone that in the age of social media and instant fact-checking, political facades cannot survive long. In the end, the confrontation raised deeper questions about representation in politics. Who truly speaks for working families? Can wealth insulate politicians from real empathy? And can someone born into privilege authentically fight for ordinary Americans? Though those questions remain unsettled, the Leavitt-Crockett clash became a defining story of political authenticity in the modern era. It proved that in today's interconnected world, truth always surfaces, and politicians who underestimate their opponents or their own vulnerabilities risk career-ending consequences.